Thank you for attending today's session on inter-entity trade. My name is Steve, and I have Anne with me here as well to answer any of those more technical questions that you may have. We're recording today's session, so as a result, everybody is in listen-only mode. If you do have any questions, please put them into the question area, and we'll have a look at that area from time to time to answer any questions you may have. A bit about ourselves before we get into inter-entity trade. We have over 5,000 Sage 300 sites running our modules, and we have these sites in over 60 countries. The average site has 2 Orchid modules, and we have over 400 Sage business partners proactively implementing and supporting our modules around the world. We're all about improving efficiency and productivity, and we're based in Sydney, Australia. Over the years, we've been awarded over 10 awards for our achievements, and we have over 13 integrated modules that have been developed using the Sage 300 SDKs. So they've got the Sage 300 look and feel and work like just any other Sage 300 product or module. And this is our 25th year in business, so we're just over 25 years old. Our modules fall into 5 different categories. The first one being collaboration and intelligence, which consists of Info Explorer, our BI tool, Notes, and Document Management Link. Notes and Document Management Link are context-sensitive products which display notes and documents to the end user at appropriate times. And Document Management Link in particular is very useful to run alongside inter-entity trade, because you can store documents in one spot and then access those documents from multiple companies, from multiple Sage databases. The second area is automation and productivity, and this consists of Process Scheduler and Report Runner. The third area is tailoring your system and integration, which consists of our newest module, which is Extender, data views, and optional tables. The fourth area is streamlining financial processes, and this is where I'll be focusing today, and that consists of EFT processing, inter-entity trade, and inter-entity transactions. I'll spend most of my time on inter-entity trade, but I will run through inter-entity transactions from a very high level, just so that you fully understand the difference between the 2 modules. We are finding nowadays that increasingly they are both deployed at the same time, and we do have a bundle for both modules. With the more complex group environments we're finding nowadays, we're finding that they both fit in very well together. The last area we have is operations management, which consists of our RMA module, or return material authorizations, and bin tracking. So getting back to inter-entity, inter-entity trade is all about transacting at the subsidiary ledger level and having groups which are trading with each other within the group. So you'd have entities within a group that are selling goods and services to each other. And this is generally done either at the AR and AP level or the PO and OE level, so all the subsidiary ledger level, whereas inter-entity transactions is happening at the general ledger via loan accounts. So where we have entities that are doing things on behalf of other entities. So for example, entity 1 might be paying an expense on behalf of entities 2, 3, and 4. In that scenario, what would happen is we'd enter the AP invoice into entity 1, and when that hits the general ledger, it would then move or send the requisite entries across to 2, 3, and 4, so the expenses are raised there. And this one entry would then be balanced by entity using the loan accounts of entity 1, 2, 3, and 4. So everything there is happening at the general ledger level, and it'll work on any GL batch. So it doesn't necessarily just have to come from entry in the general ledger or accounts payable. It could be from third-party product or any other module. Could be coming up from inventory control or anywhere else. So all our modules are developed entirely in the SDK, as I mentioned before, and on the left-hand side there you can see them sitting on the Sage desktop. We are in the process of doing the web screens, and our most popular module, EFT processing, we hope to have some web screens delivered in the very short term, and we will then be releasing web screens for all the other modules as well. So typically with inter-entity trade, what we would do is ask the following 3 questions to determine whether or not inter-entity trade is a suitable fit for an existing Sage 300 user or prospect. We'd ask or find out if the customer or prospect is running multiple entities that trade goods and services with each other. We'd find out if the site is at risk of being overwhelmed by the volume of transactions, and also the more complex trading environments which are requiring an increased number of transactions to be processed across multiple entities, even though it may really be one transaction with the outside world. And then thirdly, look into the savings that would be involved if those reciprocal documents were created automatically, removing the need for these duplicate entries to be created manually and checked and reconciled in other databases or entities. And as a result of this, we do find that the ROI is very fast. We're finding that people who previously had to rekey documents, the same document in other entities, are now able to spend their time doing other things. They're not having to spend their time doing the data entry, doing the reconciliation, looking for errors where something may have been miskeyed and the like. So inter-entity trade is all about automating the buy and sell transactions within and also across companies. There are resulting time savings from eliminating the need to create and check these duplicate entries. Processes are being streamlined, there's increased accuracy, and as a result of all of this, we have enhanced productivity and efficiency. We have very comprehensive audit trails, and I'll be running through some of that today to give you a feel for that. And what we can do as well is map what goes from one entity to the other in terms of the various fields. Once again, assisting with that audit trail process. It's simplifying the transaction flow of complex organizations, because what we're ending up doing is processing one entry, and that might be creating a chain of entries across a number of different entities, and simplifying it because the end user just has to focus on that one piece of data entry and not redoing it again and again. And it's all bi-directional, so we can process across order entry and purchase orders and accounts receivable and accounts payable. And the classic case there would be, and I do have an example of it shortly, would be a PO being raised in company 1, and that would then automatically create a sales order in company 2. You would then probably want to ship and invoice the sales order in company 2, which you can then do, which will then in turn flow back into company 1 and will then update the purchase order with the receipt and with a purchase invoice as well. So that's showing you the bi-directional nature of what we can do. I'm just going to go through a few scenarios now, because I think that it will give you a better understanding of the type of thing that Inter-Entity can do. So here's an example of, or two examples of mirrored entries. In the first example on the left-hand side, we have a group entity purchasing inventory from another group entity. So we've got Sam Limited ordering from Sam Inc. And this is really the scenario I described to you on the previous slide, where we can have that being done bi-directionally, where the purchase order is entered in Sam Limited. It would then be created automatically as a sales order in Sam Inc., where you could go in and do the shipment and the invoice, which in turn will create a receipt and purchase invoice for you in Sam Limited automatically. So we're just entering data once, and it's then flowing through to other areas automatically for you. On the right-hand side, we've got intra-group charging, where we have with Sam Inc. on the left-hand side, accounts receivable, processing an invoice, which then is being created automatically for us in Sam Limited as an invoice. So no need to rekey that invoice, that intergroup charge in Sam Limited. So those were examples of mirrored transactions where the transactions agree with each other. They've got the same dollar value. What we can also do, and this is a newer functionality that has been put into Inter-Entity Trade, is we can automate the settlement process as well. And initially, we just did it in one direction. You could process a payment and it would create the receipt. But we've just released a version, the latest version of Inter-Entity Trade, which will do it both ways for you. So you can process a receipt in Sam Inc., for example, and that receipt will then automatically create a payment for you in the reciprocal company, in this case being Sam Limited. Now, here's a more complex example where we're not dealing just with mirrored entries. And so what we can do is create a reciprocal document where the reciprocal document is not equal to the original document. And an example of needing that is right here, where we have an external customer ordering inventory, and that inventory is located in a different group entity. So the inventory in this case is sitting in Sam Limited, and we have the order coming through from the customer through to Sam Inc. So the customer would send the order through, and in Sam Inc. we would then key in the sales order. That sales order would then create a purchase order within Sam Inc., but at a lower cost because we want to keep some margin in Sam Inc. So what we can do is set up Inter-Entity Trade so that the purchase order gets created at Sam Inc.'s cost as opposed to Sam Inc.'s selling price. We can then have that purchase order automatically create the sales order in the second entity being Sam Limited. And once that's all happened, when the order is ready to be shipped out of Sam Limited, we can then go into Sam Limited, which will then produce the shipment and the invoice for us. And that will then ripple back through into Sam Inc. It will update the purchase order with the receipt and a purchase invoice, which in turn will update the order in Sam Inc. This is now going back to the original customer, where the shipment will be done and the invoice will be raised. So there I'm showing it all happening bi-directionally, but you can automate certain areas only if that's your preferred approach, in which case you needn't set up the system and these trading partners to be to work in this bi-directional fashion. And the last scenario I just wanted to run through before going through some of the software is a scenario where we've got an external charge coming in, going through to SAM Inc. in this case, and SAM Inc. is then on charging that with a markup to another company within the group, in this case, SAM Limited. So an AP invoice comes through, gets keyed into SAM Inc., and that invoice, when posted, creates a marked up AR invoice in SAM Inc., which then in turn creates the AP invoice in SAM Limited in the second entity. So putting some dollars to that, the original invoice may have been $100, and that would be keyed into AP. We may have said mark that up by 20%, so it would then create an AR invoice in SAM Inc. for $120, and then that same $120 would be mirrored across to SAM Limited as $120. So here are a few of the key screens. In the top left-hand corner, we have an example of the Audit Enquiry, which, as you can see, shows the document numbers. It shows the trading partners concerned. And if I was able to scroll across to the right-hand side, you'd see whether that those documents had transferred across to the target companies correctly. And if not, there would be an error message, which would have been the standard, whatever error message came back from the associated or Sage 300 module being used, in which case you could then have made the corrections. For example, a fiscal period may not have been open. You may have run out of land packs. There are a number of things that could potentially go wrong. But in that case, what you would do is correct the error, the issue, and then you can restart those transactions, and it will then follow through to completion. On the bottom left-hand corner, we've got the setup screens, and in this case, we're showing the OE/PO trade options tab, and we've set it up to use both OE. So OE is creating purchase order transactions, and also PO. So PO has the ability to create order entry transactions. On the right-hand side, we've got an example of setting up a trading partnership. So in this case, we have partner account 9992, which in this case is an AP vendor. And what we're telling Inter-Entity Trade to do here is that if a transaction comes through against 9992, to then create a mirrored AR invoice in ORCIN2 using customer, AR customer 9991. We've got that ability to do the markup that I mentioned earlier on, and we've got bank details for this situation where you're sending banking information, settlement information from one company to the other. We can create elimination entries, so and put them through to yet another Sage 300 company if required. So if you want to eliminate these intercompany transactions, you can do that when on consolidation. And you can include PJC, project and job costing fields, and tax information as well. Now, one thing that you would probably need to do as well is put in some account mappings, because what a transaction which is an expense in one company will more than likely be a revenue account in the second company. And here what we're doing is we're saying account 6001 is equivalent to 4232 in the target company. We can use wildcards as well, so we can use an asterisk here or multiple question marks if that's appropriate. So moving into the software itself, and what I'm going to be doing here is running through a demo script, which we're now in the process of doing, and will be made available shortly on our website. And this demo script uses all of our standard sample data, which you can also get from download from our website. So Anne is in the process of creating these demo scripts. She's done it now for all of our modules except EFT processing, and that is now in progress. So a great way to, if you are needing to demonstrate the software to anybody, or if you want to get a handle on how it works, what you can do is, just as I'm about to do now, is run through some of the transactions and suggest you run through, and then have a look at how the setup has been done. So what I'm going to do initially is process an AR invoice in Entity 4. And what that's going to do is it's going to create an AP invoice in Entity 3. What I'll then do is go through to Entity 3, have a look at the audit trail, have a look at that invoice, see what information has been mapped across, and then I'll process an AP invoice in Entity 3 and see that flow through to Entity 4. At that point, we'll process a receipt or a payment, and just see how that extra transaction, the extra settlement transaction, gets created by inter-entity trade. After that, we'll do an OE and PO example, and we'll then have a look at the underlying setup of all of this. So if I run through to accounts receivable, and apologies, my virtual machine seems to be running a bit slowly this morning. And I'm going to use a summary invoice here. You could use items as long as the revenue accounts associated with those items are mapped through to accounts on the other side, on the target side. That's fine. That question did come through the other day. And let's use customer number 9003. All of this, by the way, is in the cheat sheet. I'm just following it. And let's make this $1,000. We'll add that. And let's post that. So you'll see coming up on the screen there are messages saying that inter-entity trade has kicked in and is processing transactions. What we're doing is we're essentially subclassing these views, and that's allowing us to then create the reciprocal transactions on the fly in real time. So this has created invoice number 20. And if we now go through to the second database and have a look in accounts payable, here it is over here for $1,000. Now you'll notice here that we have used, in terms of the mapping, we've asked it to put in the company that it's come from, the database that it's come from, the user, and the batch number. We could have put a number of different things in there instead. So let's go ahead and post that. And these postings could be done automatically. I'm just leaving them open to show you these transactions prior to posting. And now let's do it the other way around. So now I'm going to process an AP entry. And this time I'm going to be using 9004. And because I'm in AP, I need to give it a document number. And let's put in $2,000 this time. I've got that same distribution code set up. And let's set that up for 2,000. Once again, let's go ahead and post that. And here it's creating the relevant entries on the other side. And let's now head back off onto the other side. And let's have a look at that last transaction that has come through over here. And once again, you can see that information coming through. And this time it's come in from Orchid. The user was admin and it was batch 51. So I'll go ahead and post that. And what I'll do now is show the transaction coming through, or rather the settlement. I could go into the other company and process an AP payment, but because I'm sitting in this company, I'm just going to process a receipt instead. And let's pay those, or let's rather deal with both of those transactions. I'll put in $3,000. And I might just limit it to invoices only. And let's go down and look for those. And here they are over here. It's that one, number 20, and this one over here for $2,000. So if I add that, and I go ahead and post that, once again, it's gone off and created the transaction on the other side. And here it is over here for $3,000. And if I go into that, you'll see not only has it created the transaction on the other side, in this case the AP payment, but it's allocated it to the relevant invoices as well. So I could just go ahead and post that now. I won't go through that process. All right, so having done that, we will now switch over to OE, and I'll process a purchase order in Entity 3, which will create a sales order in Entity 4, and we'll then go into Entity 4 and then ship and invoice it, and then see how that then impacts back on Entity 3. So if I move through to purchase orders, and let's go through and we'll pick up a few desk lamps. Choose an appropriate location. take 10 desk lamps and we'll post that. And here you can see that it's created an OE order in Orc N4 with the number of 99, and this purchase order has been created in this entity here, and it's number 54. So if we then go through to entity 4, and we now move through to order entry, here the transaction is, so it was for our desk lamps, or our fluorescent desk lamps, and we've got a quantity of 10 being ordered there. And what I could do now is go ahead and ship all, and let's go off and create an invoice as well. So what this will now do is create a receipt in the company number 3, and there it's telling us about that, and it will create the invoice as well. And there it's telling us that it's created that that OE invoice. Sorry, that purchase invoice on the other side. So if we go back into that one, we can see now that the last receipt was receipt number 100, that it's just created automatically, and it will have created the invoice for us as well. So now running through the setup, how does this all fit together? What we have done is we have improved our visual process flows. So let me go through there. And I'll be having a look at these two over here, the one for AR and AP and OE and PO. So let's start off with AR and AP. And the process that you'd generally follow here would be to set up the relevant security information, then go into the inter-entity trade setup area to the various options tabs, set those up. We then need to set up trade organizations. So in this case, I'm sitting in entity number 3. I need to tell entity 3 how to access entity 4. So I've got to put in the login credentials. And it's then a case of setting up the appropriate vendors and customers. Some of those will be in other companies. So here we've got an AP vendor, and we would then need to create an associated AR customer in a second entity, and similarly going from customers to vendors. Having done that, we need to link them together, and we would do that through the AP AR trade setup. So running through that AP AR setup. In this case here, I have AP trade set up. So I've got AP transactions creating AR transactions, but I haven't set it up on the other side. I haven't got AR transactions in this database creating AP entries. So here we're creating AP invoices or creating AR invoices, as long as, of course, we've created the relevant mapping, the trade partner mapping for the transaction being entered. We've got credit notes being created, payments being created, or payments creating receipts. And this is a new feature where you can now override the app, the source code being used on the target side, so you can more readily identify the transactions that are being created in the target companies by inter-entity trade. I mentioned earlier on the auto posting. This typically would be set to on, so it's just being the transactions are being posted automatically for you in the target companies, but that's optional. And we can use account to account and distribution set mappings, and we've got that ticked on over here as well. In terms of currencies, what we can do is just have the currency rate flow through as whatever it defaults to in the target company, or we can use a user specified rate. And you can do that if the two entities, the source and target entity, are using the same home currency. While I'm here, I'll just go into the OE-PO side as well. And over here, we've set up both OE and PO to create reciprocal transactions. And in this case over here, we're working from OE orders to PO orders. We're allowing OE orders to amend and delete PO orders on the other side, because as you know, once created an order, you can amend it, and whether you want amendments to flow through as well, that option lets you do that if required. We then specify that an OE shipment can create a PO receipt, OE invoice creates a PO invoice, OE credit creates PO return, and what information gets copied across, in this case, ship to information. On the PO side, the options are very similar, and we've got those all ticked here as well. An important option over here is using item mapping. So if you're not using the same item numbers in all your entities, you can tick this on, and if you do that, you then get the option to map items in entity 1 and what the associated item is in entity 2. We then have that same option in terms of currency rates, and importantly, we have this ability to suppress messages, which particularly in high volume sites, this request did come through from a number of sites, so we put this in. And what you can do is tell it to display all messages, which I've done at the moment. So you would have seen a few messages coming up telling me what transactions had been created. We can display error messages only or no messages. So what we typically recommend is that you start with all messages, then switch it to errors only. And if you really need to, you can set it up to display no messages, in which case you can go off and have a look at the audit trail for any transactions that haven't made it through. On the integration front, this is where you can map your various fields, and you can include a number of fields in other fields with separators, very similar to other modules throughout Sage 300. And of particular importance here, because we're getting these transactions being created in other databases, and different information may be more pertinent to people using those target databases. And we've got the same thing on the order entry and purchase order side. In terms of updates, this is true of all our modules. In the setup area, the last tab is the update tab. And what you can do is click on that, and it will go off and see if you are running the latest PU, and if not, you can then download it off our website and upload it. So the one thing I didn't show you, and I'll just do that before I forget, is the audit trail area. And what we're able to do here is see exactly what has happened. So if we go to the end here, we'll see some of the transactions that we've just created. And these have exported okay, so it's all looking good. But here we've got an example of an error. And the message over here that we have is the one that has been returned by the associated module being used on the target side. And the idea here being that you would then go into this area, see where you've got errors, fix those errors, and then what you can do in the periodic processing area is restart those transactions or a range of transactions if required. So moving back into the setup area, I had been through the trade options. Trade organization setup is where I'm now sitting, for example, in entity 3, and I have been creating transactions in entity 4, and this is where you would just set up, allocate an appropriate user. So the user would need to have all the rights required to process the transactions that inter-entity trade is processing in this target company in Orchid 4. So that needs to happen. What you do need to remember to do as well is if passwords are changed, to come and change those passwords into entity as well. Then in terms of the setup of the trade relationships, and here I'm using the data that was set up to create the transactions we've just seen. And here we've got accounts payable documents going through to accounts receivable documents, and vendor 9004 in entity 3 is equivalent to 9003 in entity 4. We're just using a price multiplier of 1 in this case, and this is the bank that we are needing to, which we needed to use when doing the transfer of the funds from one entity to the other. We're not doing any elimination entries, and we're not dealing with PJC. And in terms of tax, we can either have that default through as per the defaults in the target companies concerned, or we can push them through using this checkbox over here. So over here, what I've done is keyed the original transaction through using that distribution code. It had gone to 6383, and on the target side, it had ended up in 4204, but I could, of course, use those wildcard entries that I'd spoken about earlier on. If I was using elimination entries, I can specify what those what accounts to use over here. And on the OEPO side, let's go and have a look at the transaction that was, or the setup that was used for the OEPO example we had. And over here, we're saying once again that 9004 in entity 3 is equivalent to 9003 in entity 4. We're saying we are working with bidirectional processing, and we have additional options where we can override certain information as it hits the target side. We can override the category, we can override the location, we can override the price list, and we have other information down here as well. So in this case, we've said just send through the sales price. But if we had, for example, an order creating a PO, what we would want to do is use the unit cost instead when creating the PO within the one company or the one entity before it goes across to the other one. So that would go back to one of the latest scenarios I went through earlier on in the presentation. We can also, once again, override tax information, and we can include PJC fields and serial and lot number information. Send those through as well. So that's having a look under the hood as to how inter-entity trade is set up. Once it's set up, it does run very smoothly. The end users are now just entering as they would have before, but they're only doing the first entry. They're not having to go off and do reciprocal entries to complete a transaction, and not having to log in and out of different entities to do that. Well, I've been talking for about 45 minutes now, and wanted to keep the last quarter of an hour open for any questions that you may have. So if you do have any questions, if you could enter them into the question area on the right-hand side of your screen. And I have Anne on hand here right now, so particularly those more technical questions, she'll be in a position to answer those for us. And while we're just waiting for those questions to come through, as I mentioned earlier on, please log into our website and get the latest version of our sample data. It includes all of these companies, and also pick up that that demo script that I've just been through, and have a run through that to give you a more to really consolidate your understanding of inter-entity trade. I see there's a question that's come through from Jaime. Anne, could you answer that?
Sure. Thanks, Jaime. So the question is, what about bin tracking with OEPO trade? Are they implemented? So yes, they are, Jaime, because bin tracking subclasses OE and PO. So whenever, let's take, for example, where Steve did the purchase order in Entity 3 and it created the sales order in Entity 4. Let's say you have bin tracking turned on in Entity 4. So when you entered the PO in Entity 3 and the sales order gets created in Entity 4, and then you go into Entity 4 and you ship that sales order, at that point in time, because if you've configured bin tracking to automatically pop up around your shipments, your bin transfer will be created and you will be prompted for the bins. So you would need to complete that bin transfer, filling in the bins, but that won't stop the receipt being created on the other side. Whether you fill in the bins before or after, the receipt would have been created at the same time as the shipment. And if you amended the shipment through the bin transfer document, let's say you initially said you'd ship 10, but through the bin transfer document, you say, I only managed to find 9, so you amend the shipment through the bin transfer, it would go back and you know, when the shipment got updated through bin tracking, then a trade would recognize that and it would go and reduce the receipt amount to 9 as well. But the bins obviously aren't transferred between the companies, because A, you may or may not have bin tracking turned on both companies, and B, there would certainly be different bins in each of the companies. But the bin transfer document will automatically be created whether you manually create the shipment or where the trade creates the shipment, and similarly for the receipt. Bins are not transferred. So the second question is, did you say bins are transferred or not? Bins are not transferred. The bin transfer document would automatically be created in both companies if bin tracking is turned on in both companies, but the bins, the allocation of the bins would follow the rules of each of the companies, how it's been set up. So it would not assume that you've got the same stock in the same bins in both companies. It would follow the rules in company 1, how you say to allocate bins on shipments, and you would still need to manually confirm that. And in company 2, it would follow the rules on how you allocate receipt bins, and you would still need to manually confirm that. Bins are not transferred across. Happy New Year to you too, Jaime, and to everyone on the session.
Any other questions? No, well, if that's it, thank you all very much for attending. We do appreciate you taking the time out to attend our webinars. We know how valuable your time is, and really do appreciate that. Hopefully you have got some value out of this, and stay tuned for the upcoming webinars that we have on other subjects. Thank you.